Greetings and welcome. My name is Will Ruiz. I'm a MakeMo librarian at the LA County Library, and today we're going to do a pretty simple origami sailboat. Actually, we're going to make this. So it's a pretty simple origami design, and I'll take you through the instructions step by step. But one thing I want to mention is that if you've never done origami before, we really want this to be a fun experience and something that's calming and not frustrating. So please take your time, try and be patient with the folds, and I promise you'll get better with practice. Another thing to note about origami is the type of paper we're going to be using. Today, for this particular model, we're going to be using a rectangular piece of paper. I'm just using standard colored printing paper. You can use even newspaper or magazine paper if you have it lying around. You'd want to choose a thinner paper rather than a thicker paper because it makes it a little more difficult to make your folds accurately on very thick paper. And another thing I want to mention is that you do want to take your time to line up your folds as you go. Your final model will look a lot better if you take your time along the way at each fold and try and make sure the edges of the paper are aligned accurately. But don't be discouraged if your model doesn't look exactly like mine on your first try. Like I said, you will get better with practice. I encourage you to pause the video as you're doing your folds or rewind the video for anything that is confusing. I'll go over some confusing steps multiple times. And another thing I'll point out about origami is that you're going to see a lot of elements of symmetry. In this case, for this model, we're talking about bilateral symmetry, which is essentially going straight down the middle, so that one side is going to be the same as the other. So for example, for this piece of paper, we would have a line down the center, and that would mean this side is the same as this side. But we could also have a line down this median, and that'll mean that the top is going to be the same as the bottom. And many times for your folds, we'll do a symmetrical fold where we'll do one fold to the front and then flip over the model and do the same fold to the back. Along the way, I'm also going to point out what shapes we end up with as we progress through the model and point out some of the angles that are really easy to recognize as you go through the folding process. You'll note for a rectangle, for this particular piece of paper, we have 4 right angles measuring 90 degrees each. So all 4 of them will add up to 360 degrees. But when we fold the paper into a triangle, you'll recognize that all of the angles are actually going to add up to 180 degrees. And we'll be able to use that knowledge to deduce which angles are which number of degrees by how they're segmented and how they progress through the model. So I'll point that out along the way, but let's go ahead and get started on our first folds. So for the first fold, we're going to bring this edge right here all the way down to this edge right there to make a crease down the middle. So we're going to start with a rectangle and we're going to end with a rectangle. This one, to get started, is pretty important that we have it aligned accurately. So take your time here. And once you have the edges of the paper aligned, go ahead and place it on the table and make your creases. Okay. So next, I want to point out that you have the open area of the paper, and I want that to be facing towards you. So if you need to, go ahead and flip over your piece of paper. The next fold is going to be to create a crease down this center line right here. So we're going to bring this corner of the paper over to this corner, and we're going to align this line up with this line. So let me show you what that looks like. Like I said, we're just using this to make a crease though, and then we're going to unfold that and use the crease to line up our next 2 folds. Okay, so like I said, make your crease along this side and then unfold it, and now you should have a crease going right down the middle. Okay, so the next fold is also going to be a symmetrical fold, so we're going to do the same thing to this side as this side. I'm going to do it both at the same time, but what we want to do is bring these 2 corners to meet down here at the bottom and the middle, and that's going to align this line and this line right here with the crease that we folded down the center. So let me bring one side down and try and make sure it's lined up with that crease. And before I crease it, I'm going to bring the other side to make sure that those 2 bottom corners are even. And then I'm going to make these creases. Okay, so they're pretty well aligned at the bottom. That's what we want. So next I want to point out that for this next fold, you have two flaps here that you're working with, one on top and then one below it. You're only going to fold this one on top for this one, and then we're going to go ahead and flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. So we're going to fold a crease going along here, which will bring this flap up as far as it will go, like this. And then make a crease going all the way across from side to side. Now this next two steps are optional. These edges will sort themselves out if you don't want to do this, but I find that it makes the model neater and easier to fold if we fold these little flaps down here. So we're going to align this side down to that side right there. And then it'll make a crease along the edge on the top. So we'll do that to both sides. And the next thing we're going to do is flip the model over and repeat those same three folds. So along here and the two flaps, but on the other side, like this. So we'll bring this flap up and try and align these two creases with the one below it so that they're lined up together. And then we'll fold these two flaps. So let's pause for a moment. We started with a rectangle, and now we've arrived at a triangle. And you might recognize that you still have this distinct right angle right here. Like I said previously, the three angles of your triangle are going to all add up to 180 degrees. So we can deduce from the fact that we know this is a right angle here, that the remaining two angles are going to be that 90 degrees basically split in half. So they'll be 45 degrees each, and then together the three angles will add up to 180 degrees. So you'll see some other angles along the way that are really easy to deduce the exact measurement of the angles based on the angles that make it up. So let's continue. One thing I want to point out as well is that if you want, you can stop here and you have a pretty cool hat. And if you made it out of newspaper, or perhaps a larger piece of paper, you could probably wear that hat. But if you want to continue on to make that sailboat, what we're going to do is open this hat all the way. So we're going to take the opening towards us, and at the middle of each of these edges, start to spread those apart as the hat opens. And you'll see as those edges go apart, the other corners are starting to come together. And pretty soon, you'll notice that you're actually able to very easily flatten that out back into a square on your table like that. So let me go through this again, or you can rewind, of course. We start right here with the triangle. We're going to take the open edge, which is opposite that right angle, and at the center start to pull those apart until the other corners start to be brought together. And then once they're pretty close together, you can flatten it out really easily on the table. So we've transitioned back from the triangle now to a square. And the next two folds we're going to be doing on each side of this square. So we're going to take this one flap right here. Notice you have another flap under it, but we're just going to take the top one. And we're going to bring this corner all the way up to this corner right here, which is going to create a crease going from here to here. So I'll show you what that looks like, but you want to bring it up all the way and make your crease. And then next you'll simply flip the model over and do the same thing to the other side. So I'll bring this flap and this corner all the way up to that corner, and then make a crease. So we've arrived back to the triangle. Still have that right angle right there. And then you might also notice that you do have another hat. So if we want to continue on to make the sailboat, we're going to do the same thing we did to the last model, and we're going to open that hat up all the way, just like the last step. So I'll flip it towards you so you can see. We'll take the edge of the paper at the middle and start to pull those apart. And the same thing happens as before, where the other corners are going to come together, and then we'll just flatten that out into a square on the table. Okay. Now remember, just as before, we're going to open these edges open the hat as much as we can until it starts to bring those corners together and flatten into a square. And so believe it or not, that's the last of the folds for the most part. You have a boat hidden in here, and it's really easy to reveal it. What you'll need to do is make sure that the open part is facing towards you. And then you can pinch on either side of these corners up at the top, opposite from that opening, and start to pull them apart, and you'll reveal actually the sail in the middle. So keep on pulling those apart, and then you'll eventually just need to flip it over so you can make a crease along this bottom edge, and you're done. Now you have a sailboat. So just to point out the elements of symmetry that we have in this model again, the obvious one that I showed you before is right down the center, where this side is going to be the same as this side. And if you fold it in half, you can verify that pretty easily. But you'll also notice that if you look at another angle from the top down, you're going to see bilateral symmetry going straight down the center here through the sail. Even though you can't fold it along that, you can definitely see that it's symmetrical along that axis as well. One other thing I want to point out, like I mentioned before, how you can see which angles are which number of degrees by the angles that make them up. If I fold this corner over really quick and line that up, you can see that I quite obviously have a right angle of 90 degrees. And then this angle actually that we made from the rest of that paper is half of a 90-degree angle. So we can tell that that's 45 degrees right there, which will mean that the angle from here to this crease plus the angle from here to here is going to be the combination of those two numbers. So 45 degrees plus 90 degrees. So this will be a 135-degree angle from here all the way to here, that obtuse angle that you see right there. So you'll start to notice that along the way as you fold more origami, how it's really easy to notice the different angles that come out of the folds. The last thing I'm going to show you guys is that in case you're not quite satisfied with the height of the sail on this model, you can actually stretch that out a little bit and make it look more like this, which is a cool proportion and a little bit more realistic. And it's really easy. Let me show you how. So the first thing you're going to do is try and open up the model at each end. And what you need to do is pinch down right here at the end of the sail. And what you're going to do is basically pull a little more paper through that. It's going to start to crinkle, but you can flatten that out as you go. And then do that to one side at a time. So once it's done, it won't come anymore. We'll go ahead and flip that over and do the same thing until we can't pull any more paper through. And just flatten out any crinkles that you create. And once it goes to the end, all you'll need to do is flatten that out again and create another crease. And now you have a sailboat still, but it's got a little bit more realistic proportions on that sail. Well, I do really hope that you enjoyed this origami tutorial. We really hope to see you in the library soon, but we also encourage you to reach out to us at lacountylibrary.org or on social media at LA County Library. And if you just made one of these along with us, we encourage you to share your work. Again, we hope you have a great day, and we hope to see you in the library soon.